السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. We welcome everyone either here in person at the Khalil Center headquarters or joining online via YouTube or Facebook. Please let us know where you're joining from. Inshallah, the comment section will be open for questions. And towards the end of the presentation, we will have a section for Q&A with our presenters, inshallah. So we're very excited to be presenting this presentation on grief in Mawlānā Rūmī's Mathnawi. I probably won't do too much justice explaining the presentation, so I'm going to leave that to the presenters as they start, inshallah. But we wanted to bring something rich from our Islamic heritage, our Islamic tradition. Mawlānā Rūmī is no stranger to our households, or especially people who come from the subcontinent. We wanted to give our speakers, particularly Mawlana Salih and Ustaz Waris, an opportunity to delve into that tradition, to tell us a little bit about how Mawlānā Rūmī addresses this idea of grief, or huzn, known in the Arabic tradition. So we have with us, as you can see, two speakers: Mawlana Salih Basir, who is currently an IFTA student at Dar al-Qasim and a master's candidate at the University of Chicago, focusing on the late Mughal period and the rise of colonialism in India. His primary interests are Hanafi legal theory, Indian Persian poetry, and creative writing. And to his left, we have Ustaz Waris, who I had the pleasure of meeting for the first time today. So we welcome you to the Khalil Center. Ustaz Waris obtained his bachelor's from the University of Toronto, majoring in Near and Middle Eastern civilizations and political science. His interests have led him to poetry and Islamic thought in the ancient cities of Central Asia, where a new Persian emerged a millennium ago. So inshallah, I will give it off to them, and we look forward to welcoming everyone here.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على من لا نبي بعده ولا أمة بعد أمته ولا كتاب بعد كتابه ولا شريعة بعد شريعته ولا صحابة بعد صحابته أما بعد. Thank you guys so much for coming. Really appreciate this. It's been so long in our Muslim lands where people have gathered together to discuss Mawlana. This used to be a very common occurrence throughout Muslim lands, from Istanbul to Kabul to Lahore to Delhi to Hyderabad. Over the past 200 years, this culture has been lost, and that connection and the station of Mawlānā Rūmī as a figure who united the ummah with beauty and with poetry has almost been lost. And it is with this intention that we have come here today. Allah says in the Quran, وَذَكَّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَى تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And this idea that reminders benefit the believers. But this idea of a reminder isn't necessarily just restricted to the akhirah, but it should also encompass all of the salihin, all of the fudala, all of the righteous people, right? And as Allah teaches us in the Quran, رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَا بِالْإِيمَانِ, right? That, oh our Lord, forgive those who preceded us in faith, right? Because our dhakiratul hifz, the memory that lies within us, is connected to our turath, connected to our civilization. And I say this, and I'll say this again, that our turath, our history, our culture as Muslims, as an ummah, is like a mother to us. And in the same way that we are demanded to honor our mother, the Holy Prophet said, alayhi salatu wassalam, الرحم معلق بالعرش فمن وصلها وصله الله, that the maternal relations are hanging on the throne of Allah, and whoever unites that, Allah will unite with them. So too is our turath, so too is our Islamic civilization. When we connect with our turath, with those people who are on the haqq of the Holy Prophet and his companions and his family, may Allah be pleased with all of them, then Allah will unite with us. And we have seen this time and time again, that even in the Quran, most of the Quran is about the past. Most of the stories, most of the prophets are preceding our Holy Prophet, right? Or sorry, all of the prophets are preceding our Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, right? How much of the Quran is about the past versus the future, right? And it is within this vein that we ask everyone to just remember, right? And this is what is the Quran but a reminder to connect us not only with our current memory, but with the memory of the entire sequence of ethical Quranic Islamic time, as Iqbal has taught us. And it is within this vein that Ustad Waris will give us a slight history and a slight introduction of who was Mawlana Jalaluddin Rumi, right? So much has been lost, so much has been misinterpreted, so much has been misrepresented. And me and Ustaz Waris were discussing yesterday that why is it such? why is it such that translators like Coleman Barks and other Orientalists mistranslated Rumi? Right? And one thing that you and I had come to yesterday was that these people could not believe that the Quran and the Sunnah could produce such beauty, that the Quran and the Sunnah could produce such a joy. And for them, they had to link it to somewhere else, right? And so then the obligation and the onus is on us that to prove that connection of joy and of beauty and of grief of Mawlānā Rūmī towards Islam, that Islam can be a way to bring joy and beauty in the world. What does Allah say in Surah Taha? مَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لِتَشْقَى. Allah has not revealed the Quran that you are لِتَشْقَى, that you are badbakht, or that you are unfortunate. Right? So what is this khushi? What is this joy that Mawlānā Rūmī has come to teach us? And so in that vein, Ustad Waris will give us a quick political and social history of Mawlānā Rūmī's life.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me here. Pleasure to be here. Am I loud enough? Is this working all right? Yeah, perfect. All right. Thank you very much for that, Mawlana. So like Mawlana Saleh said, we'll start off with just a brief introduction to Mawlānā Rūmī, his life, so that we can all sort of be at a level understanding of whose works we're discussing today. Mawlana Jalaluddin Muhammad Balkhi, or Rumi, was born in what is, was born and raised in what is today's Afghanistan, Balkh, in the northern areas, close to what is today's Tajikistan and close to Uzbekistan. He was born to none other than a very specific Sultan Bahauddin Walad. His father was a scholar, an Islamic scholar in his own right, very renowned. And at that time, Balkh was known as Bilad, the mother of cities or polities, places. It was a very renowned place with many scholars in the city and in the region. Many were attracted to come and study there, to teach there, to sort of live there and live out their lives there. But what was happening at that time in the early 13th century, there were Mongol incursions that were taking place by the line of Chengiz Khan, and he was, his line, they were not at this point Muslims. Later on, these Turco-Mongols do accept Islam and actually carry forward the civilization of Islam and add to it. But at that time, they were not Muslims. And if anyone has a familiarity with the history, the Mongols were not particularly merciful opponents. They were not people who followed any particular merciful rules of war and of taking prisoners and things of that sort. Rather, when the Mongol invaders would come into a city, they would raze it to the ground. Women, children, the sick, the elderly were all, none of them were spared. Plants, shrubs, trees, animals, nothing was spared. Everything that could be destroyed and killed was destroyed and killed and annihilated. So with this in mind, Sultan Bahauddin Walad is very aware that it seems to be only a matter of time before the Mongols reach Balkh, and it would perhaps be prudent of him to take his family and move westwards. So the family of Sultan Bahauddin Walad move over across Central Asia and the Iranian plateau, eventually settling in today's Konya, located in present-day Turkey. So just one thing to note here for sort of historical context, when we think of, when I mentioned Turkey or Anatolia at this point, there is no Ottoman state, there is no Ottoman polity. In fact, Osman himself, Osman Ghazi, which the Ottoman state was named after, has either not been born or he's a young child. His father, who's now quite famous amongst our circles, Ertugrul, Ertugrul is there. He's a contemporary of the time. But again, there's no Ottoman state. Constantinople is still in Byzantine hands. So really, Konya is on the frontier of Muslim lands with the Byzantine lands.
From one frontier to another.
From one frontier to another, that's right. So they were on the frontier where the Mongols were coming in practically, to the other side now, where the Byzantines are on the other side. And Konya is no insignificant city, though, I should mention, while the Ottomans are, of course, not around. Not all of the history in that region surrounds the Ottomans, per se. At the time, the Rum Seljuk Sultanate is there, and that's their main base of operations. Their capital, you could say, is in Konya. And Sultan Bahauddin Walad, the father of Mawlānā Rūmī, is given a post there as the Sadr Mufti. He is the head scholar of the city. He's assigned there to teach and given a salary for that. And the young Jalaluddin is then sent to Aleppo and to Damascus to do his studies. So now we're coming to understand Mawlānā Rūmī himself. He completes his studies, or he takes up first under his father and then later in Aleppo and Damascus his studies, where he becomes a master of the Islamic sciences, tafsir, hadith, Quran, fiqh, you name it. He studies this all and is recognized as a renowned scholar in his own right. He returns to Konya, and after the passing of his father, he is assigned taking over his post. So Mawlana is there. He's in Konya. He's again this renowned scholar, very very respected in the city of Konya. And then something happens that kind of turns his life upside down. He encounters a specific person. I'm curious if anyone might shout out the name. Who does he encounter? Shams Tabriz. That's right. So Shams Tabriz is someone who Mawlana encounters, and he really turns his life upside down. There's actually a very nice line of poetry, which I'll pull up, which was later attributed here, not to Mawlana, but about him. He says, "Mawlawi hargiz nashad Mawlānā Rūmī ta ghulam Shams Tabrizi nashad," meaning that the Mawlawi, Mawlana himself, he would have never become the Mawla of Rum had he not become the ghulam, or the servant of Shams Tabriz first. So Shams Tabriz, what kind of effect does he have on him? What really is happening? How does he change his life? How does he become, as they say, zero zabar? Shams is not someone who you would look at as a traditional scholar, right? You think of Mawlana, here's someone who's very well respected, perhaps has an entourage of his own, and is very well regarded wherever he goes. You know, his presence is felt. You know that this is someone of repute. Shams, on the other hand, is more darweshi in appearance. He's someone who looks a lot more, not even just like common folk, but perhaps of the lower rungs of common folk, an outcast, you might say. And folks are very confused. His students are very confused. Why is our teacher, our respected teacher, associating with this, you know, seemingly otherwise person, let's say? Why is he associating with them? What's the purpose of this? They don't understand. And you know, to make matters worse, Mawlana himself goes into a worse, of course, in air quotes here. They go into a period of 40 days and 40 nights at Chilla, of where he engages in intense studying with Shams in seclusion, and he emerges from that a changed person. So,
yeah, if I could, since we don't have two microphones, just to add on to that, we have to remember that Imam al-Ghazali radiallahu ta'ala anhu died in 1111. Mawlānā Rūmī is born in 1207, and we know that Imam al-Ghazali is that Sara Chashma, the fountainhead of a singular personality who synthesized fiqh and tasawwuf, or this idea that tasawwuf and the traditional spaces of Islamic learning were not mutually exclusive. Now, although Imam Ghazali had achieved that with books like Al-Iqtisād fil I'tiqād and Ihya Ulumuddin wa ghayruhuma, that was not necessarily the reality on the ground. And although this is still Iran, right, parts of Western Iran and Eastern Anatolia, that reality was not present on the ground, where everyone looked at as a Sufi as a person of learning, as a person of Islamic knowledge, or to sort of take them to a higher spiritual station. Now, because of this world is still very bifurcated or fragmented, in many ways it is today like that, unfortunately. That sort of sense of, as you said, zero zabar, or that confusion or that aghastness that some of the students of Mawlānā Rūmī had towards Shams Tabriz is present because of the fact that people have not taken Imam al-Ghazali's project to its full logical conclusion. And I will say this, and I have no shame in saying this, that Mawlānā Rūmī and Shams Tabriz are singular personalities who are achieving Imam Ghazali's goal in uniting these two worlds, and they're a singular metaphor of achieving that. But yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Absolutely. No, thank you very much for that. Going off that thought, it's important to mention that before this, Mawlana was not writing poetry. And even when it comes to writing poetry, he wasn't writing the poetry himself. He would be inspired. He was writing fatwas. He would be inspired, though, and his students would write down his poetry, and that's what's been passed on to us. But at the time, poetry in the Islamic world was not something that was very closely associated with spirituality. There were some authors, Sheikh Fariduddin Attar Nishapuri, for example, had written the Mantiqat and many other works. And those are poetic works that are based in spirituality, but rather most poetry was written for kings, right? So if someone was a king and there was a poet, the court poet would perhaps be hired to write poetry in praise of the king, or to write something of beauty that the king would appreciate. This was the primary sort of understanding or the role of poetry within Islamic civilization at that time, in that geographical context as well. So Mawlana starts writing poetry, and his poetry comes into being, and it's written down and preserved by his students. But again, you can imagine that this is a very interesting situation for him to be in, right? He goes from this very respected figure. In fact, there are even accounts, and we know that his wife told him, "Stop. What are you doing? You're disgracing yourself. You're associating and saying all of these things, which to a regular, devout Muslim person at the time may have been very confusing, right? What is this talk of wine, for example, right? Things of this nature. It wasn't on a plane where most people were able to readily digest and understand what was being said. Now, with that, I think we'll actually transition into some of what we're going to be covering today. So first, we'll start with the Ghazal of Mawlana's from the Divan Shams. We'll read from there, and really the topic of that Ghazal, it's a shorter one, is going to be on the idea of gham or sorrow, in contrast to the lutf-i yar, the grace of the beloved. And then we'll actually go into the Mathnawī afterwards. So I'll just mention a few words about the Mathnawī. Mathnawī is a type of poetry. It's epic poetry. It's ode in English, we would say. And it differs from a Ghazal in that its rhyming structure is different. Ghazals generally can only be so long because you kind of rhyme each line with what you opened with. So like that would be like A, B, A, C, A, D, A, and everything has to rhyme with A. But in a Mathnawī, you can write much longer. And as you can see here, the book is quite thick. This is 6 volumes. It's just A, B, B, C, C. So this is about 50,000 lines long. Like I mentioned, 6 volumes. We'll be reading from the 5th today. And it's known as the Quran in Farsi. There's actually a line of poetry that says something along the lines of Masnawi ma'nawi Mawlawi hast Quran dar zaban Pahlawi nest payghambar wale darad kitab. So it says the Masnawi of Mawlana is the Quran in Pahlawi, which is what the name for the Middle Persian language was. He says nest payghambar, he's not a prophet, but he has a book. So there's not this claim, of course, that he's a prophet, anything like that, but he has a book. And the reason why it's called the Quran in Farsi, this is not just some hyperbole for us to think, this is a very important book for us to read or something along those lines, but rather there are direct quotes from the Quran that are inserted into the poetry in poetic meter. So, if for a reader who's familiar with Quran, with hadith, there are over 600 references to hadith in the Mathnawī. When you read these things, you understand, this is a reference to that hadith, to this line of the Quran. And in addition to direct sort of bringing in of Quranic ayat into the poetry, there are tons of allusions as well, or allusions to various verses, to various passages, stories.
Yeah. I mean, so for example, just for that line, he would rhyme Quranic verses with Persian words. So he has a line where he says, "Tur mast wa kharra Musa sa'iqa." So he was able to interlace Quranic verses within the rhyme scheme of classical Persian poetry, right? Which is really, really phenomenal. But yeah, just so you guys have an idea what's going on.
Absolutely. So I think with that, we'll start with the Ghazal. Yeah? Okay. I'll read it in Farsi first, and then we'll do a short English translation, and then we'll get into the Mathnawī after, inshallah. بیرون شو ای غم از سینه که لطف یار می آید تو هم ای دل ز من گم شو که آن دلدار می آید نگویم یار را شادی که از شادی گذشته است و مرا از فرط عشق او ز شادی عار می آید مسلمانی را مسلمانی ز سر گیرید مسلمانی ز سر گیرید که کفر از شرم یار من مسلمان وار می آید برو ای شکر که این نعمت ز حد شکر بیرون شد نخواهم صبر گرچه او گه هم کار می آید روید ای جمله صورتها که صورتهای نو آمد علمهاتان نگون گردد که آن بسیار می آید در و دیوار این سینه همه درد ز انبوه در و دیوار سینه همه درد ز انبوه که اندر در نمی گنجد پس از دیوار می آید. So I'll read I'll translate this for you briefly here, just maybe a couple of lines. The very beginning, Birun shaw ay gham az sina ke lutf yar me ayad. We said the contrast here in this poem, the theme is between gham and the lutf yar, the grace of the beloved. He says, leave my heart, exit from my heart, O sorrow, for the grace of my beloved, my yar, my Lord is going to enter. It's coming. Tuham ay dil zeman gum shaw, O heart, leave me. Ke on dildar me'ad, because the one who has my heart is arriving, is going to come. Nagoyam yar ra shadi kaz shadi guzashtasto. I would not call my yar, my beloved, happiness or joy, for he is beyond joy. Mara az farte ishq o shadi ar me'ayad. The shadi ar me'ayad. He says that on account of my excessive love for him, joy comes to me as disgrace. I'm disgraced by this love. He says, Musalmanan, Musalmani ze sargired. Muslims, O Muslims, take Islam from the beginning. Take Musalmani, Islam, take it again from the beginning. Re-understand it, rethink it. Ke kufr as sharmi yareman Musalman war me'ayad. For kufr, for heresy, on account of my love for my yar, comes to me Muslim-like. Think about that, right? Very interesting concept that kufr is coming to me as if it's Muslim. Rethink Islam.
That's obviously also allusion to a hadith in Bukhari where the Holy Prophet ﷺ said that inna shaytana yajri fi majra al-insan, or fi majra al-dam, that shaitan courses through the veins of all human beings. And then one of the Sahabi asks the Holy Prophet, what about you? And the Prophet said, yes, but mine has become Muslim. It's a Bukhari hadith.
Again, if you don't know those references, they kind of fly over your head. You're like, oh, what a nice line of poetry. But you can see that Mawlana himself, again, an expert in these fields, knew what he was writing. These are all, with purpose. It's not just of hawa randomly that these things are in there. These connections can be made. He says, bro, ay shukr ki ne'mat ze hade shukr birun shud. He says, leave, oh shukr, oh gratitude, leave, for this blessing extends beyond, it exceeds the limits of shukr. He says, I don't want sabr, I don't want patience, even though it's useful from time to time. It's not necessary for me. I'm beyond sabr, I'm beyond shukr, right? There's this idea of sabr and shukr being complementary to one another. He says neither of those are needed. We've gone beyond that. He says, now leave all suratah, all jumla suratah, like all forms leave. New forms are entering, new forms are coming. That your flags, your banners will be lowered, referring to the surat, the forms. He says all of these things that we understand, right? When we think of forms, he says all of this leave, they're all going to be lowered. The flags and banners of them will be lowered. It's coming exceedingly. These new forms coming from this love, they're coming exceedingly. And he says very beautifully here at the last line, he says, on account of this excess, all of this love, the doors and the walls of my heart are being shredded, are being ripped. Of my chest, all of this is being ripped. And he says, he says, this love won't fit through the door. It doesn't enter through a door. It is all permeating from all of the walls, right? If we look around this room, it's coming in, taking over from everywhere. It's not going to fit in through the door. So really, We'll move into the Mathnawī shortly, but just again to sort of tie this together, right? These are a lot of words, a lot of different concepts, but this idea of gham, leave, all, and not just gham, but all forms, all understandings of everything that we have, leave in order to make space for what is coming, what will overtake, which is the lutfiyar, the grace of the beloved. And I think the poem that we're going to focus on, moving on to the Mathnawī here, it's going to really highlight some of this understanding of this lutfiyar, the grace of the beloved, and how all encapsulating it can be. A little disclaimer, perhaps.
Yeah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. No, thank you so much for that, Ustad Waris. It was really, really beautiful. And so much to dissect. And we wanted to give you one ghazal from his Ghazaliyat Shams Tabriz, so you could see the music of his poetry, but also in the Mathnawi, which is a more didactic. When we say didactic, we mean akhlaqi text, ethical refinement. Also, we wanted to give a disclaimer that we are not clinically trained practitioners, and we are not offering any type of medical advice. We are simply just commenting on Mawlānā Rūmī's understanding of grief, and not, this is no counsel, just how Mawlānā Rūmī understood grief through the Quran and stories of the prophets, peace and blessings be upon all of them. I wanted to start off with a ghazal of Hazrat Iqbal Lahori, where he says, "Ay mutrebe ghazal, bayti az murshid Rum avar." O singer of ghazals, come bring a line from Mawlānā Rūmī. Ay mutrebe ghazal, bayti az murshid Rum avar. Ta ghut zanat janam dar ātish Tabrizi. So that my entire Jan, my entire soul can be submerged in the fire of Tabriz. And again, that's an allusion to Sayyidina Ibrāhīm alayhi salam in the fire. We will start now from Daftar Panjum, the 5th volume in the Mathnawi. As what is mentioned yesterday, he begins the Mathnawi with Bishna as Nechun Hikayat Meikunad, like how Allah begins the Quran with the letter Ba. He also begins the Mathnawi with the letter Ba, and also a command. We're not going to do that passage today. We're going to do a passage about grief, but specifically about grief-filled thoughts. And Mawlānā Rūmī has 3 sections on this. We're only going to read one section. Part of it is in Persian, and part of it is actually in Arabic. So this is a half Persian, partly Arabic poem. So I'm going to go ahead and read the Persian, and then I'll read the English, and then we'll start with Sharha and Tashrih together. Bahamayat, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. شروع میکنم به نام خداوند را که خداوند جهان، خداوند آسمان. صلوات به حدود و به محدود بر پیغمبر عربی هاشمی قرشی مطلبی اسماعیلی علیه افضل الصلوات و اکمل التحیات و ازکى المبارکات. و دعا میکنیم، متوسل میکنیم که هرچه خیر و سعادت و برکت می آیند از این قرائت، از این تشریح، از ارواح پیغمبران، از ارواح فرشتگان بنماید و ببخشاند انشاءالله، و بالخصوص در روح مولانا جلال الدین رومی انشاءالله. آمین. بسم الله. هر دمی فکری چو مهمان عزیز، آید اندر سینه‌ات هر روز نیز. فکر را ای جان به جای شخص دان، ز آنکه شخص از فکر دارد قدر و جان. فکر غم گر راه شادی می زند، کارسازی های شادی می کند. خانه می روبد به تندی او ز غیر، تا در آید شادی نو ز اصل خیر. می فشاند برگ زرد از شاخ دل، می فشاند برگ زرد از شاخ دل، تا بروید برگ سبز متصل. می کند بیخ سرور کهنه را، تا خرامد ذوق نو از ما ورا. غم کند بیخ کش پوسیده را، تا نماید بیخ رو پوشیده را. غم ز دل هرچه بریزد با برد، در عوض حقا که بهتر آورد. خاص آن را که یقینش باشدین، که بود غم بنده اهل یقین. گر ترش روی نیارد ابر و برق، رز بسوزد از تبسم های شرق. سعد و نس اندر دلت مهمان شود، چون ستاره خانه خانه می رود. آن زمانه که او مقیم برج توست، باش همچون طالع شیرین و چست. تا که با ماه چون شود او متصل، شکر گوید از تو با سلطان دل. 7 سال ایوب با صبر و رضا، 7 سال ایوب با صبر و رضا. در بلا خوش بود با ضیف خدا. تا چو وا گردد بلای سخت رو، تا چو وا گردد بلای سخت رو. پیش حق گوید بسد گون شکر او، که از محبت با من محبوب کش. رو نکرد ایوب یک لحظه ترش، از وفا و خجلت علم خدا. بود چون شیر و اصل او با بلا، فکر در سینه در آید نو بنو. خندان پیش او تو باز رو، که اعدنی خالقی من شره، لا تحرمنی انیل من بره. ربی اوزعنی لشکر ما ارا، لا تعقب حسره لی ان مضا. آن زمیر رو ترش را پاس دار، آن ترش را چون شکر شیرین شمار. ابر را گر حز ظاهر رو ترش، گلشن آرنده است ابر و شور کش. فکر غم را تو مثال ابر دان، با ترش حکم کن چنان. بو که آن گوهر به دست او بود، جهد کن تا از تو او راضی رود. ور نباشد گوهر و نبود غنی، عادت شیرین خود افزون کنی. جای دیگر سود دارد عادتت، ناگهان روزی بر آید حاجتت فکرتی که شادیت مانع شود آن به امر و حکمت صانع شود تو مخان دوچار دانکش ای جوان بو که نجمی باشد و صاحب قران تو مگو فرعیست او را اصل گیر تا بوی پیوست بر مقصود چیر ور تو آن فرع گیری و مزر چشم تو در اصل باشد منتظر زهر آمد انتظار اندر چشش دائما در مرگ باشی ز آن روش اصل دان آن را بگیرش در کنار باز راه دائم ز مرگ انتظار. So I'll go ahead and start with the first two lines and translate and a little bit of commentary, and we'll go back and forth. So he starts off and he says, Har dami fikri chu mehmani aziz. Every breath, every moment, a new honored guest comes. And ayad andar sinaat harruz needs, like an honored guest, it comes into your heart. So Mawlānā Rūmī is saying, right, as we'll see in the next line, fikr ra e jan bajai shakhs dan za anke shakhs as fikr darad qadr o jan. O soul, regard every thought as a human being, personify that as a human being, and treat that human being like a guest, in the way that Ibrāhīm alayhi salam, when the angels came to give news of destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, Ibrāhīm alayhi salam still, antum qawmun munkarun, even though there was nuhusat, Ibrāhīm alayhi salam still treated them excellently, right? As Allah teaches us in the Quran, that mahman nawazi. So Mawlānā Rūmī says, don't just have mahman nawazi with human beings, but have mahman nawazi with thoughts.
I might just add, keeping in mind the cultural context, right? There's a saying that we have in Farsi, we say, mehman dost khudast, right? So anytime a guest comes to you, you don't turn them away, you treat them as a friend of God, right? And so here he's saying, like Mawlana Salih said, treat every thought that comes into your heart, into your mind, treat it as an honored guest.
Wait, also, we were going to read the entire English, right? Actually, after the Persian. Yeah. Yeah, so we were going to do English and then line by line again. So let's just do line by line, right? Because we're already here, right? Yeah, okay. That's fine. فکر غم گر راه شادی می زند کار سازی ها شادی می کند. If the thought of gham, fikr gham, if the thought of gham is removing shadi, in Urdu we say shadi to mean wedding, but literally in Farsi it means one joy, which is a wedding, because for many people the only joy in their life was just the wedding day, right? No, that was just Mughal Persian. But so Mawlānā Rūmī says that if that thought of sorrow is removing the joy in your heart, right? You don't know, but it's actually, that thought of grief is actually preparing the path for joy. So that thought of grief is it's come and it's actually literally making way, creating works, right? Creating the work for joy.
Yeah, just the theme of separation comes up a lot in the very opening chapter, which you covered yesterday. So it comes top of mind, right? When it comes to love and separation, how does one understand, the pain of separation, which we discussed today, which is, of course, a negative feeling. It's only through having experienced the joy of union, right? Or if you flip that the other way around here, how can you understand the joy of union if you haven't experienced the pain of separation, right? If I come to Mawlana Salih and complain of a broken heart, if he's never experienced that, he's not really going to be able to understand me. And similarly here, we have to, in order to understand or feel happiness, he's saying, right, we have to experience sorrow. So when sorrow comes, understand it not as this thing that's just there and it's making you sad, but rather that this is a necessary condition in order to pave the path for joy to enter your heart.
خانه روبد به تندی او ز غیر تا در آید شادی نو ز اصل خیر. This thought of grief, keep the words in your mind. These are both Arabic words, but a Persian idafa. Fikr gham, the thought of grief. خانه روبد به تندی او ز غیر. Tundi is violently, or with a lot of force. This thought of grief is violently sweeping your house of everything else. It's literally renovating, tarmeem of your house. It's doing islah of your house. Why? For what purpose? For what purpose? So that a new joy may come from where? From the source of all goodness, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So this thought of grief is sweeping away the house from everything. right? And then he says in the next line, "May fashanad barge zard ashahidil, ta baroyid barge sabze muttasil." That it scatters the barge zard, barg is leaf, zard is yellow, right? Ashahidil from the branch of the heart, so it scatters, right? The yellow leaves from the branches of the heart, right? And again, the word asal, right? Where any of hufaz in the Quran, where is the only one of the two places in the Quran where the word asal comes? فَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاء, right? So and what is that metaphor? It's a tree. So he's using that same metaphor in that same language. So if you're an alim and you're a hafiz, it immediately will evoke that, because there are very few times in the Quran where the word asal comes. So then he brings the analogy Quranically of a tree and branches, right? So this thought of grief scatters the yellow leaves from the branches of the heart. Why? So that connected, incessant, continuous, constant, new green leaves may come. Barge subs, right? Subs, we have sabziyan now, we just use it for vegetables, but originally in Farsi it meant just green. Ta baroyed barge sabze muttasil.
میکند بیخ سرور کهنه را تا خرامد ذوق نو از ماورا. This is also very interesting. A similar theme here. He's saying it rips off the root of the old song, the old joy. It rips that off, and what does it put in its place? Ta khiramat zawq now, so that new tastes, new enjoyments can come from where? As mawara, from that which is beyond, right?
Like
Mawlānā Rūmī, right? So from what is beyond. So it will take these old songs, these old tunes that you've got, it will rip them out of its place, and in its place, new enjoyments, new flavors will come from where? From beyond, from mawara, from asl khair, as we said earlier. غم کند بیخ کژ پوسیده را تا نماید بیخ رو پوسیده را. He's saying that gham, sorrow, what it will do, it will rip from the root the kaj pusida ra, the branch which is rotten and crooked. That rotten and crooked branch will be ripped. Ta namayad بیخ رو پوسیده را, so that what may come in its place, that new root, that new sapling, that new growth, which is ru pushida, which is hidden. Again, this idea of being from beyond, right? And the idea of veils, of pardas, is very present within this work, within the Mathnawī as a whole. He's saying that this crooked, rotten branch needs to go, so that from beyond, that ru pushida, that hidden, that covered branch may grow in its place.
غمز دل هرچه بریزد با برد. غمز دل هرچه بریزد با برد. Ya barad, thank you. Dar ivaz haqqa ke behtar avarad. Whatever grief that may
Whatever it takes away.
Whatever it takes away, thank you. Whatever grief that may take away or raise it, right, to shed. So whatever it takes away, dar ivaz, in exchange, haqqa, truthfully, in truth, behtar avarad, it will bring something better. Right? So again, whatever grief may take away from you, whatever it may literally shed away, reizan from rekhtan, which is the first name for Urdu, in exchange, it will bring something truthfully so much better. يعني بالخصوص, especially for that person كيقينش باشدين, he has yaqeen. Right? What happens? Kibuad gham bandai ahli yaqeen. Grief will become the banda, the servants of ahlul yaqeen. I.e. that the person who's mutayaqqin, who has yaqeen of the existence and the wujud of Allah and the message of Islam, he can divert gham where it needs to go. He can understand it with a purpose. He can understand it where it comes from, right? And he can, I don't want to use the word manipulate it, but he can sort of do what he wants with it, and he won't let the gham affect him. He will affect the gham.
Yeah, really, I think, coming down on the idea here that there's going to be gham which enters your heart, but if you have yaqeen, right? Really, he's saying that for the one who believes that gham is the slave of the ahli yaqeen, those who have yaqeen, then certainly, he says, with yaqeen, there's a play on words here, that he'll be fine. He's not going to be affected by this. Now, of course, it's a little bit of a simplification translating there, but this idea that you have to believe, you have to understand that this gham, this is not going to remain. You have to understand it in the context that we've provided here, right? That he's provided here, that it's here to shed the old and bring in the new. Thank you very much. گر ترش رویی نیارد ابر و برق رز بسوزد ز تبسم های شرق. Translation.
If I could just add one thing, there's a hadith in Bukhari when the child, the baby boy of the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam passes away, and Sayyidina Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu sees tears streaming down his face. And the words in Bukhari, I believe it's Anas ibn Malik who reports the hadith, says, "Wa anta ya Rasulullah," and you too are also weeping. And what does the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam say? "Inna al-ayna la tadma' wa inna al-qalba la yahzan wa la naqulu illa ma yarda bihi Allahu rabbuna." That truly the eye weeps, the heart grieves, but we don't say anything except that which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who is more ahli yaqeen than the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam? So this idea again of how Mawlānā Rūmī is suggesting that to make gham your banda. Don't become the banda of gham. Right? Not again, no medical advice or counsel, just what Mawlānā Rūmī is saying. So he says, "Gara tursh ruyi na yarad abro barq raz basuzad as tabassum hoy sharq." That if the clouds and the lightning show a frowning aspect, tursh ruyi, someone who's literally abasa wa tawalla, think of it in that same word, abasa, right? Sour-faced, right? Raz basuzad as tabassum hoy sharq. That if the clouds and the lightnings never show a frowning aspect, i.e. with thunder and rain, then the vines for fruit will be burnt, because if the sun is always shining, right, it's too much happiness, right? We have this idea of toxic positivity, right? And this is what Mawlānā Rūmī is almost, anticipating, right? That if the sun is always shining, right, and if clouds and lightning never manifest, i.e. never show a sour face, then the vines and the fruit will be burnt by the astabassum hoy sharq, literally from the smiles of the east. And the east is obviously the place of the sun. Do you want to read the next line? Sa'ad nas andar dilat mahman shavad. These are two Arabic words. I would love just for someone to go through the entire Mathnawī and just jot down every Quranic word and Fusha word, and it would be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So he says, Sa'ad nas, joy and ill fortune. We have the word in Urdu, nuhusat, same word. Sa'ad nahs andar dilat mahman shavad. Joy and ill fortune are guests in your house, right? And that, what was the hadith of the Holy Prophet? Treat your guests with respect, or give him home for 3 days and 3 nights, right? Bukhari hadith. Sa'ad nahs andar dilat mahman shavad. Chun sitara khana khana may ravad. Right? Joy and ill fortune are guests in your heart, and like stars, khana khana may ravad. They go from house to house. Right? They alternate, right? They're cyclical.
آن زمان که او مقیم برج توست باش همچو طالعش شیرین و چست. طالعش, thank you. It says, at that time when it's staying in your residence, in your house, in your mansion, when it's with you, treat it. Bash hamchu, treat it as with a certain sweet versatility. Shirin o chust. Be sweet and versatile with it. Adapt. Meet it where it's at. He says, تا که با مه چون شود او متصل شکر گوید از تو با سلطان دل. And so here there's a bit of a wordplay with ma, I think, in the sitara and the khana, the moon and the stars from earlier. But he says, once it moves on and it goes to and it leaves you, so that when it rejoins the moon, it may speak gratefully to you. It may speak gratefully of you to the Lord of the heart, right? So shukr goyad as tu ba sultan adil. Again, this idea of treating it as a guest, such that when it leaves, right? I mean, that probably something we can all relate to. You go over somewhere as a guest, as soon as you get in that car, you're on your way. Immediately the chatter starts about, this was how the Mehman Nawazi was, here's how the food was, here's how they were, someone said this, someone. Make it so that when that gham leaves your heart and it goes back to the Lord, it's going to say shukr of you. It's going to be thankful and express gratitude towards how you treated it while it was with you. You know, very difficult thing, but a very powerful way to think about how to deal with gham. And then this next part. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to add something so that we don't miss it. But Mawlānā Rūmī brings this idea. You know, obviously he's coming from Central Asia. There's these towering spires and minarets. You know, in Muslim lands, places like Iraq and Uzbekistan and Afghanistan and Iran. And so this idea, when he says that on zaman ke u muqime burj tust, that if grief comes onto the burj, what is the burj? Like the spire, right? If grief stops or lands on that spire, and in the olden days, you know, the story went that, you know, you were obviously trying to escape the Mawlana and the Maulvi, and you were trying to go meet your Layla at night. She would be standing on the spire. So and obviously it's a circular thing, so you would run up. That's what he says, chun tali'ash shirino chus, that you're literally ascending the tower to reach the spire, because like that's where your you know, beloved is, and you're running and you're racing. So he says that thought in your heart that Allah is putting inside of you, right? Whether joy or grief, be shirin and chust with it. Whether it's joy or whether it's grief, shirin and chust. I loved your translation. You know, versatile, sweet versatility, right? Or like an active versatility. Or yeah, and then this Sultan Dil, right? The King of Hearts. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala but Sultan Dil, right? Who is the Malik of the heavens and the earth and everything that resides. And the Holy Prophet teaches us, what is more valuable in this world than the heart of a believer? What is more valuable in this world? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the king of that. Forget about the empires and the kingdoms. Allah is the king of hearts, and that is the most valuable thing in this world.
7 سال ایوب با صبر و رضا در بلا خوش بود با ضیف خدا. He says that for 7 years, Ayub alayhi salam, با صبر و رضا, with patience and with satisfaction, and رضا, خوش بود, he was happy with. در بلا خوش بود, so در بلا, in bala, and what's a good word for bala? In calamity. In calamity, he was satisfied, he was patient, he was happy even with Zaif Khuda, with the guest of God, like we said earlier, right? Mehman, dost khudas. The guest is the friend of God. So he says, with God's guest, he was patient. And you know, I think we can expand, I think after this next line, maybe on the trials and tribulations of Ayub alayhi salam. He says, Ta chu wa gardad balay sakht ro pesh haq goyad basad gun shukre o. He said, such that when this calamity returned to its Lord, right? It left Ayub alayhi salam and went back to its Lord. What did it do? It said hundreds of gratitude, hundreds of shukr, and how it was treated by Ayub alayhi salam. Kaz muhabbat ba man mahbub kush. Ro nakard Ayub yak lahzat turush. He says that despite the fact, you know, given that I am a mahbub kush, I kill that which is beloved.
The grief. Right?
I'm grief, right? The grief being this mahbub kush, it kills that which you love. He says, with me, despite me being mahbub kush, he says, ke pesha haq, no, sorry, ro nakad Ayub yak lahza tursh, that not even for a moment did Ayub frown or make this negative, you know, this idea of this complaint. And I think yesterday I even mentioned a very beautiful was a hadith about not complaining to God of God, of being fate, oh falak, this happened, but rather the Prophet ﷺ, when he was faced with tribulation, he complained of his own weakness, right? This idea of not turning it on God and saying, why did you do this to me, and why are you, you know, tormenting me? But rather Ayub alayhi salam instead is satisfied and patient and appreciative of his Lord, even in the most difficult tribulations, such that when that grief leaves, it expresses gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yeah, and you know, again, just emphasizing the point, right? That these thoughts are going to return back to Allah. So let it speak well of you, right? That this sahib dil, this owner of a heart, treated me well, right? And then he says, "Az wafao khajlate ilme khuda, parchun boad chun shiro asle u ba bala." That out of Ayub alayhi salam's loyalty, wafa, khajlat, out of his shame, ilme khuda, khajlate ilme khuda, of his knowledge that Allah knows. This is so important, that Allah knows everything, right? If we can truly manifest that and materialize that and reckon with it, that every single thought, right? Allah knows that we are experiencing it. Ayub alayhi salam was like milk and honey towards tribulation. Ba Shiro asl u ba bala. He was like milk and honey towards tribulation because it came from Allah. Who did it come from? Right? And Mawlānā Rūmī throughout the Mathnawi will use other examples that even if Layla, when Majnun was wandering and howling in the desert, if Layla had even sent a thorn, he would have prostrated before it, right? Knowing who was sending it to you. And so that's why I think this line is so important. He had shame, and he knew that Allah knew. Right? To know that Allah knows. And this, Inna Allahu Sami'un Alim. Right? That Allah is all knowing. Fikr, darasina, that ayat, no. Every new thought that comes into your heart, we love this line. Khande khandan pisha u tu bazro. Khande khandan pisha u tu bazro. Go meet it with smiles and laughter. Every new thought that comes into your thought, no, that is coming constantly, anew and anew. Khande khandan pisha u tu bazro. Go and meet it, right? With a blazing smile on your face, knowing who does that thought come from? From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, but he says, don't just do that. What else do you need to do? And this is his training as a Mawlana. كي أعدني خالقي من شره لا تحرمني أنل من بره ربي أوزعني لشكر ما أرى لا تعقب حسره لي إن مضى. That go and meet it with smiles and laughter, but still make dua, and that's it. Oh my protector, save me from its evil, and do not deprive me, and give me from its goodness, from its barre, right? From its birre. Rabbi awzi'ni li shukri ma ara. Oh Allah, give me the tawfiq for gratitude for that I see. And this is a direct allusion to the dua of Sayyidina Sulaiman alayhi salam in Surah Namal, right? What's the ayah? Sulaiman وهم لا ربي أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وعلى والدي ونعمل صالحا ترضاه. Right? That, oh Allah, give me tawfiq. أوزعني يعني وفقني. Give me tawfiq. And Mawlānā Rūmī is making that same allusion. ربي أوزعني لشكر ما أرى. Oh Allah, give me tawfiq to make shukr for those things that I see. And he's alluding to the fact that obviously Sulaiman alayhi salam could hear and he could see things that me and you and I cannot see. Right? ربي أوزعني لشكر ما أرى. Oh Allah, give me tawfiq to give gratitude for the things that I see. لا تعقب حسره لي إن مضى. And do not succeed it with grief if it does pass. Right? And then these are the two approaches, right? This is, what else is the sunnah is that you train your mind to think in a certain way and you do dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? What else? What else is the prophetic approach?
آن ضمیر رو ترش را پاس دار آن ترش را چون شکر شیرین شمار ابر را گر هست ظاهر رو ترش گلشن آرنده است ابر و شورکش. So, there's not just this idea of just simply go and embrace, all calamities in this very naive sense, right? He says here, pardon me, on zamir ro turish ra pas dar. That thought, that sour thought, pay attention to it. Beware, right? Pas dashtan. He says, be aware of it and approach it cautiously. But he says, on turish ra chun shakar shirin shamar. There's a very intentional thing here, right? It's not this naivete of just anything and everything, I'm just going to smile, right? Again, it's not about that toxic positivity you mentioned earlier. We see a lot of that online these days, but rather go and make an effort and take that thing which you are aware that it is sour. He identifies it as ro turish, something which is frowning, and count it as something that is sweet. Be aware of what it is and count it as something sweet. He says, abragar has zahir ro turish. Right? Because sometimes things appear bad to us, we don't actually know. He says, Abragar has zahir ro turish. He says, though the clouds in their apparent zahir, in the way that they appear to us, it looks frowning, it looks sour. He says, Gulshan arendast abro shorakush. It is Gulshan arenda, it brings the garden, and it is shorakush. It kills the infertility of the land, right? It makes it fertile. So again, this idea that it's coming and paving the way for something. Be aware of what it is, understand it not just for being what it is as roturish, as a frowning and sour thing, but also understanding that it's going to bring you something better, right? He said that earlier.
From Fikr Gham, right? Fikr Gham ra tu misale abardaan. فکر غم را تو مثال ابردان با ترش تو رو ترش کنچنان کم کنچنان sorry با ترش تو رو ترش کم کنچنان. That's very tajnis there. Yeah. So he says, know fikr ghamra. Again, the same phrase. Know that the thought of grief is like a cloud, right? Do not look so sourly on the sour. Ba turshe turo tursh kam konchinan. That do not look so sourly on the sour. And the next line he clarifies, Buke on gohar badaste ubuad. Buke on gohar badaste ubuad. Juhud kunta as tu ura razi ravad. That it may be that the pearl in its hands, right, or the pearl that is in your hands, endeavor, juhud kun, endeavor or struggle, that it may depart from you well pleased, right? So that whatever is in your hands, make sure that, you know, when it leaves your hands, it's razi, it's well pleased. Var nabashad gawhar nabud ghani, adat shirin khud afzun kuni. And even if it's not a pearl and it's not wealthy, it's not giving you wealth, at least what? You will increase a habit of sweetness with every thought. That you will train yourself to be sweet with yourself. Literally, Mawlānā Rūmī is telling you to be kind with yourself, to be kind with your thoughts, to be shireen with your thoughts. This is not something that's new in our tradition. This is 900 years ago. Mawlānā Rūmī is speaking this in Seljuk Konya for us to listen and for us to take ibrah, right? So that you can be shireen, right? That even if that doesn't turn out joyfully, at least you have created a habit with yourself to treat all of your own thoughts with kindness. You always, it's so interesting because we say treat yourself kindly, but what if using Mawlānā Rūmī we said treat your thoughts kindly? Treat your own thoughts with shirini, with little shirini. It's like this idea of like sugar and sweetness, right? Do you want to do the next line or go ahead?
So continuing that, he says, جای دیگر سود دارد عادتت ناگهان روز برآید حاجتت. Really just saying, if this gham, if this sorrow that comes to you doesn't leave you with a pearl at the end, right? If it's not in fact something that's going to come and leave you with something better, like Mawlana Salih said, it's going to leave you with a good habit. That habit of you being sweet with your thoughts, of you being kind to your thoughts, is going to remain with you. And here he said that even that, he says, at another point in your life, at another time in your life, you're going to have developed this habit, and what's going to happen? Suddenly, nagahan, you won't realize it, but this habit will benefit you in one way or another. It'll come to your aid. It'll come to you when you have a hajat. You will have trained yourself to think well and to approach well and positively approach things that even are not so positive, such that you will benefit from that, even if it didn't leave you, right? Sometimes, like the rain comes, I don't like the rain, it makes a nice flower grow. Even if the flower didn't grow, the fact that you approach the rain with that thought that this can make a flower grow, can leave something better from you. Next time when a bad thought comes to you or a sad thought or something comes to you, it will benefit you in that you're not going to be automatically, what's the word here? You're not going to fall into despair, right? You've already developed a habit of approaching these things from a place where you're appreciative of it. Yes. فکرتی که از شادیت مانع شود آن به امر و حکمت صانع شود.
Yeah, so he says that whatever thought, fikrati, so fikra in Arabic, and then the ya to make it singular in Persian, any thought that prevents you from joy, know. On ba'amro hikmati sani' shavad. Know that it comes from the command and the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here he rhymes mani' and sani'. So any thought that hinders you from joy, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded that, and that has a larger purpose for you. And to know that Allah does not want joy for you just in this moment, but perhaps the next 15 years will be of joy, right? And to train yourself to always think like that, And then the next line he says, Tu makhan do chara dangash e javan, bu ke najmi bashado sahibe qaran. That, oh youth, don't call it worthless. Do cha dangash, right? Don't call it worthless. Why? Because it may be a star. Bu ki najmi bashad o sahib qiran. Sahib qiran in the classical Islamic world was someone who was born at the conjunction of two stars. So for example, the ancestor of the first Mughal king, Taimur Lang, is called Sahib qiran. And Shah Jahan, the builder of the Taj Mahal, is called Sahib qiran Sani. The possessor of the conjunction of these two stars. But he says that don't call this thought worthless. Why? Because it may be a star, and it may have been extremely fortunate and may presage much fortune and joy for you.
تو مگو فرست او را اصل گیر تا بوی پیوسته بر مقصود چیر. He says, do not say it is a branch, take it to be the root in order that you may always be the master of your desire. So tu mago fer'ist, he says, when this thought comes, don't think of it as just a branch, right? He says, take it as a root. What is it? Is it Bekh here? I just read it.
It should be far'ist and asl.
Asl gir, sorry, yes. So don't take it as a branch, take it as the asl. Understand it beyond its surface level, right? Again, to use that example of the rain, right? You see the cloud, you're like, okay, this is what it is on the surface level. It's rain, it's a gloomy day, what is it? But beyond that surface level, you understand that this is necessary for life. It's necessary for the continuation of nature and for our being. He says, Tabu'i paiwasta bar maqsood chir. Yeah.
In order that you may, right? That you may always be dominant. Chir is like ghalib, that you may always be dominant over your desire. And remember, the word fara' and asl are an allusion to the Quranic verse, right? Asluha thabit wa far'uha fis sama. That the believer's asl is established, it's in the dirt, wa far'uha fis sama, and the branches of the believers are in the heavens, right? And he's making an allusion here. And so the idea is that don't take that thought of grief as a branch, take it to be the root. Why? So that you may always be a master of your object of desire, right? And what that means is that you control the destiny of that grief, is really what Mawlānā Rūmī is trying to say, right? And then we can, quickly wrap up. Vartu anra fara giri o muzir cheshmetu dar asal bashad muntazir, right? That if you take the branch to be mudir or to be harmful, your eyes will always be waiting, right? To see the root. What is going on? Where is this coming from? How is this happening to me? Right? He says that if you don't see it as the asal, if you don't see it as coming from Allah, and you only see it as the root, where is this coming from? What's the tree? What's the root? Right? How is this happening to me? I don't know where this is coming from. My life was going so well. How did this just hit me? Right? Because then he says, Zahar Ahmad intizar andar chashish, daiman dar margabashi or dar murgabashi za'an ravish. That he says waiting to see, i.e. literally anxiety. He's trying, the word intidad here, he's sort of using as anxiety. Waiting to see is like poison. Where did this come from? What else is going to happen? What if this leads to this, and this leads to this, and this leads to this? So he says, don't take it as the branch. If you take it as the root, you already know where it all comes from and where it's all going to go and where it's all going to end up. Right? Da'iman. This is the Arabic adverb, yani da'iman. In Persian, da'ima, dar murgabashi za'an ravish. By that method, you will always be in death. Always be in anxiety if you see it as the fara' instead of the asl. And inshallah, the last two lines, Waris, please close us off.
Asl dan an ra bigirash dar kenar. Asl dan an ra bigirash dar kenar. Baz rah daim ze marg intizar. Marg intizar. Baz rah daim ze marg intizar. So this idea again that if you only understand it at its surface level, it's going to be this waiting that you have. It's like poison. It comes to you all the time. And if you're always eating this poison, you're taking this poison, you're going to be in a state of dying. He says, Asl dan anra bigresh dar cannot understand it from its root, from its reality, and keep it close to you. Baz rahid daim ze marg intizar. I really love the way you translate this, and I'm going to pass this.
Yeah, that as Ustad Wada said, that if you recognize it as the root, bagirish dar kinar, and keep it to your chest, i.e. you safeguard it and you control its destiny, baz rah daim za marg intizar, you will forever be saved from the death of waiting. He says literally the death of anxiety, that Mawlānā Rūmī calls anxiety a form of death in this life, and that we want to be delivered from that sort of death. The only death that we seek is the death of our lower nafs. That's the only death that we seek in this life. Right? And again, these were just some small words that, Ustad Wadis and I wanted to share of the brilliance, the joy, the grief, the methodology, and most importantly, at least for me, is a reclamation of who Mawlānā Rūmī is. And I mentioned this at the beginning, and I'll just repeat it for those who weren't here. Obviously, we know Mawlānā Rūmī was a best-selling American poet for almost 3 decades until Rupi Kaur, I think, overtook him, right? And he has been mistranslated and misrepresented for so long. This Ḥanafī Mufti, right? One of the most brilliant Muslims of the Ummah, and truly we can say one of the miracles of the Holy Prophet, that someone like him could have written something that was based on a Nabiyul Ummi, an unlettered prophet from Arabia, alayhi salatu wasalam. And I mentioned this all to say, and please let us add to this after, is that one of the main reasons why Orientalists and why this Orientalism of Rumi emerged was because they could never ever believe that this amount of joy and intellectual vitality could come from the Quran and the Sunnah. Although, and as we've seen, this entire book, 50,000 lines, is jam-packed, chock full with the Quran and the Sunnah, right? And that the Quran and the Sunnah can absolutely cultivate beauty and joy and bring Islam to the highest dimension and the highest form of life, and address every medical and spiritual and legal and cultural and civilizational need and artistic and aesthetic need that we as human beings live and die on. And that Mawlānā Rūmī, I believe, is no better exemplar than this. And as Muslims, we have we have only suffered by losing Mawlana. We have only, and I do believe that perhaps if there was a way, perhaps in the akhirah, that if we were to do a statistical survey of Muslims and their well-being of 2020 versus 1820, when Mawlānā Rūmī was widely read, I know that there would be a vast difference, because Mawlānā Rūmī teaches you how to live, right, through the Quran and through the Sunnah, because not everyone is going to be able to read through the asrar of the Quran, through the secrets of the Quran, but Mawlānā Rūmī knew, right? And to the testament of hundreds of thousands of ulama from West Africa to India for 800 years, right? And we have that ijma' of the ulama of what a singular figure that Mawlānā Rūmī was. And this is so important, because also Mawlānā Rūmī teaches us that Islam, that as a faqih or as a mufti giving fatwa in the streets or on the minbar, isn't always going to work for everyone. Sometimes you need beauty and poetry in your life too. Right? And if he as a Ḥanafī Mufti can understand that as the Grand Mufti of Konya on the frontier between the Byzantines and the Muslim world, we can also understand that too, and do our obligation that we as Muslims are an entire civilization, and we are not, people who lack creativity. Right? And just the dua of the Quran, رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لَنَا وَلِإِخْوَانِنَا الَّذِينَ سَبَقُونَا بِالْإِيمَانِ, that, oh Allah, all those who preceded us in faith, forgive them. And that's all we ask, that, oh Allah, whatever khair, whatever barakah, whatever ihsan and reward that may have emerged, any faults are only our own, are only mine, that send it to the grave of Mawlānā Rūmī tonight. And may Allah forgive him. May Allah grant him joy in barzakh. May we all stand as shuhada, as gavahan, that Mawlānā Rūmī spread the message of joy and of beauty, namely that of the Holy Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam.
I really don't know what to say after that, but other than thank you all for coming and for listening to us and hearing us tonight, and thank you for your invitation here. I think maybe we can open to questions if there are any. So if there are any questions, please feel free. And then, yes.
I know that usually in the Sufi tradition also, there's no differentiation between thoughts and emotions, at least not that I've seen. So, I mean, in this case, would this be better translated as emotion in the more modern context? Or would you still say thoughts? Because then the question comes up, do thoughts not also come from shaitan? Like, what would be like a waswasa, which would be from shaitan? And then how do we treat that waswasa if it's making us or asking us to do something else? And emotions make more sense to me, because even in psychology, they argue that whether emotions come first or thoughts come first, or the thoughts can transfer emotions. Emotions are the origin, and they're the ones that are guiding even the thoughts, which is what I agree with. But the modern psychological context, they don't agree with that, because they want more control over it. So they go with the thoughts being. So just a clarification. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I can just briefly kind of say I would agree with you that the line between thoughts and emotions here is blurred. I don't think it's one that's necessarily like we use the word thoughts, and I think fikr, generally we in Arabic and in Farsi we'll.
But it's interesting, because in Urdu and in Persian, the word fikr, we say fikr mehum, but I'm in worry. So now even though it means thought, in Urdu we use it to mean as as an emotion. So I wonder, as you said, it's probably both.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was getting at, right? I think we may have taken the word thought and used that more as like a literal translation of the root of the word, but in the actual context in which it's used, if we culturally contextualize it and take it out of the realm of translation, which we've tried to do today, I would agree with you 100%, right? It's the same thing in Farsi that, fikr khub, fikr bad, good thoughts, bad thoughts, but it also has an emotional component to it. It's not this entirely separate thing, like there's a thought and there's an emotion that may be associated or something like that with it, but rather they're treated and understood as one.
Go with that, actually, even in psychology, like emotional focus theory talks about how in order to overcome an emotion, you have to experience it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to allow yourself to feel rather than trying to push it to the side and ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that we saw that where he says understand it for what it is and see beyond just the surface level of it, right? So nowhere is it suggested, right, that you should throw out this thought or ignore it or just brush it under the rug and not deal with it, but rather, if we just take the example of a guest, of a mehman, right? You never treat a guest as if it's not there and brush it under the rug, right? Rather, you will embrace it in its entirety.
You shift your entire intention toward, you shift your entire attention towards that person. Your entire day, is sort of addressing the needs of that, right? Yeah. No, but that was a really good answer. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions or anything to add there? Yeah, online questions, sure, please.
A lot of people seem to be asking about, as an English speaker, where can you start learning or reading the Mathnawī? And then another question, I guess, which is related, is how can you make sure it's an accurate translation? Because you mentioned, a lot of mistranslations out there. So, I guess steps as to how an English speaker go about axing some of what we're talking about here later.
HSS?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll sort of lay out, I think, a step-by-step kind of thing, and then pick from what you can, right? I would say when it comes to any text, not just the Mathnawī per se, it's always best if you can read it in its original language, right? So this is highly contextual. If you're somebody who has a background, say, in Farsi, I would say work on your Farsi and try to read it. Have a good translation side by side. So I would suggest the Nicholson translation. It's very true to its origin, but it perhaps may not be enough. It's always best if you know the original language. If you don't know the original language, my next sort of step is, if say you understand a language close to it. So if you understand Urdu, for example, read it with the Urdu translation, right? Because Urdu and Farsi are closely tied together. There's going to be some understandings in that translation which will easily carry over. Whereas if you're reading it in English, there are certain cultural concepts and ideas where there's more of a gap for you to try to bridge in order to be able to understand what's actually being said. So that would be my second sort of suggestion. And then my third suggestion is that if you're going to read it just entirely in translation, I would suggest either the Nicholson translation, which is an older translation, and he did a very good job with it, or the translation by Ustad Jawed Mujaddidi, who is a contemporaneous translator and scholar of ours, and he's done it translated in meter, and in rhyme. So it's actually a much more pleasant read than a translation that's not in rhyme. So that's the translation by Nicholson or by Ustad Jawed Mujaddidi. The translation that is going to omit all of the references to Islam and sort of present you with something new. It's not really a translation, if we're being honest. It's more an interpretation. That is the one by Coleman Barks. That's probably the one you'll find in the bookshelves of Indigo and Chapters. You guys have Indigo and Chapters in the States? Barnes and Noble?
Yes.
There you go. In the bookstores, so
it's just Amazon here now.
Right. So, in most bookstores, you'll find Coleman Barks translation. That's the one that I would approach with caution, because Coleman Barks himself didn't know Farsi. He doesn't know Farsi even today. He rather read the Nicholson translation, and then he would have inspiration, or he'd see like a dream, or like he'd be inspired to then interpret that translation. So there's, a missing link. And then, of course, he very purposefully, he says this himself, left out any references to Islam, to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to God, as we understand him, really just to make the message more universal and digestible and appetizing for the general American public. If you have anything to add.
Yeah, I would just know. Good answer, good question. I would just add that we as Muslims often think about this as, man, I really want to read the Mathnawī, as opposed to how do I make sure that we all are reading the Mathnawī together? And what I mean by that is instead of, let's say, focusing on, let me do this one by one, perhaps even getting together money or a fund to hire a Farsi teacher, to hire a Mathnawi Khan, someone who is studied in this training, and then he can teach the entire masjid together or offer classes. So as opposed to just you receiving manfa'a, I think a much more helpful and long-lasting way, as the Holy Prophet ﷺ teaches us, is that have a longer vision. Have your community get together. There are definitely, just in my community, from the Bay Area in California, I mean, we had so many Afghan uncles who were incredible translators and inheritors of the Mathnawi. Many of them even had sanad back to Hazrat Mawlānā Rūmī. And nobody in our community cared to even sit down with them and have a conversation with them. And I'm sure there are people like that here. These people exist all across America. Imagine, if we had just put together a fund, found, one or two or three uncles who would have been overjoyed to teach it and to pass it on. Right. So I would just add that is that just sort of separate tangent, but we are in a very critical time where a lot of our grandparents or even our great grandparents are in, late 70s, late 80s, who are the last living links to those traditions. Please don't do an injustice to them and to their past by ignoring them and not accessing what they have to offer. And I would say we are in a very, very nazuk, sensitive moment, and they have a lot to teach us. There's a lot of rhetoric of, the masjid uncles or the masjid aunties, they're always sour, we don't get along with them. Some complaints are justified, some are not. I'm not trying to discount anyone, but that doesn't mean that you can't engage with them Islamically, and they have nothing to teach you.
Hopefully that answers it.
I guess the last question for tonight. Somebody's asking if Mawlānā Rūmī speaks extensively about anxiety in the Mathnawī in other places as well, in addition to which I think you alluded to at the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like if you, for example, there's a website that has the entire Mathnawī online. There are multiple words that the three main words that he uses are gham, which is Arabic, ranj, which is Farsi, and andesha, which is also Farsi. If you just look at those three words, you'll see hundreds and hundreds. We actually debated. There were so many passages that we could have used. You had mentioned two before, and that we could have really touched on. And yesterday, as we mentioned, Mawlānā Rūmī starts off the Mathnawī with grief. Bishnu az nechu hikayat me kunad az judaiha shikayat me kunad. And one of the reasons I believe is because of the hadith of the Holy Prophet, where the Holy Prophet said, "Nuzil al-Quran bil huzn," that the Quran was descended with grief. Right, and this is an important concept. I mean, we can think about the challenges and the andesha of the prophets in the Quran, and that is very important to Mawlānā Rūmī. And there's hundreds. I mean, we could have 3-4 year lecture series just on grief in the Mathnawī if we really wanted to. Definitely not a year, at least minimum 2 years, I think. So that's yeah.
Like 2 years of lectures, right?
Yeah. I would say even more.
Yeah. There's the Mathnawī covers really a lot. There's a lot in it. I am still working through the text. I will not claim to have read the entirety of it, but absolutely agree with Mawlana Salih that there's a lot in there. And outside the Mathnawī as well, you can look at the Ghazaliyat, and I would also encourage looking at the Fihi Ma Fihi, the discourses of Mawlana, where he in prose as opposed to poetry discusses many topics. So yeah, absolutely.
No, thank you guys so much for coming. It's been so beautiful. I mean, as a third generation American Muslim, for me to access Mawlānā Rūmī was so beautiful. And I know that for a lot of people, just Mawlānā Rūmī can offer so much beauty. And I would just encourage everyone, if it just means studying Persian online or doing something like that, there is so much manfa'a for you and definitely for the wider ummah. But jazakallah khair.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you everyone for coming. We'll just officially close out. There are some refreshments outside in the hallway. If anybody wants to come and ask them kind of off the mic any questions, inshallah, they're around. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. MashaAllah.